بهم يا ربنا يسر لنا أمورنا واكشف لنا كروبنا والطف بنا والمسلمين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're here back in the Zawiya Podcast, and we've got with us a very special guest, Ustadh Turhan. So Ustadh Turhan has had a significant impact on many of the people who frequent the Zawiya, especially through his classes on Said Nursi. We used to have classes in Melbourne University. A lot of the brothers and sisters here used to go to that, and other institutions as well. So we're very, very happy and honoured to have you here in the Zawiya with us today.
It's my pleasure, my honour to be here actually. Jazakallah khair.
So inshallah, let's get straight into it, inshallah.
Okay.
Obviously, mashallah, you're someone who is, mashallah, has spent a lot of time studying the life of the great Shaykh Badiʿuz Zaman Said Nursi, and obviously he's gone through a lot of struggle, and he's had a lot of insight as well in how to deal with struggles. Could you tell us maybe, or give us some insights, maybe for example, on how any lessons we can apply from the struggles of Sayyidi Imam Nursi, and maybe apply it today with Muslims living in today's age?
Okay. Well, let's start just by maybe giving some background to how it is that he ends up in struggle in the first place. Like, why does he end up? He's someone who underwent extreme suffering. Extreme suffering. He was poisoned on many occasions. To give some, context to all this, he lives at a time where Turkey's being the people of Turkey being made to undergo this sort of forced secularization. There's a program of forced secularization in Turkey.
This was after a certain leader who came.
Indeed. So there's the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And all those sort of events subsequent to World War One. And I guess with a view to preventing the Muslims and indeed the Ottomans from becoming a threat again. These sort of Western-backed secularist forces in Turkey embark on this program of secularization. Just to give some examples of what that program entailed. Gatherings like this were banned.
Subhanallah.
All the Sufi tikkas were shut down.
Subhanallah.
Anywhere where you would go to, read the Qur'an or learn the Qur'an, was closed. All the madrasas were closed.
Subhanallah.
Everybody was forced to, you couldn't wear a takka, you couldn't wear the style of hat that was worn by Muslims back in that day. Rather, you were forced to wear, you had to wear the Western style cap. Western style. So that if you weren't, I think there are even stories of, persons who were punished by death, for failure to adhere to some of these obligations. So it was a fierce program of secularization. And the
juxtaposition, just how Turkey was just before the fall, Turkey was the central, the capital of Islamic Caliphate, the whole world,
exactly right.
And people were forced, to overnight, subhanAllah.
To do the very opposite. And that was, I guess, what was seen as necessary, to prevent, at least in the short term or the medium term, a sort of, resurgence. So Bediuzzaman sees all this, lives right in the midst of all this. And he sees that what's happening is that the Qur'an and Islam is being attempted to be taken from the Muslims. So, at the same time, certain materialist and atheistic ideas are being inculcated into the community. So he sees the threat posed by this, and his Risale Nur, his magnum opus, which is at bottom a kind of, in a non-classical sense, a tafsir of the Qur'an. He writes this 6,000-page sort of non-classical commentary on the Qur'an, with a view to opposing not with the sword, but with the pen. This sort of forced secularization program. Because of his influence and because of his perceived success in doing that, he's exiled. He's imprisoned, he's exiled, and this goes on for decades. as I mentioned, as part of that, they knew that they couldn't just outright kill him. Okay, so what they instead do is they try to make his death look like an accident. So they try to poison him. They try to freeze him to death. You know, they leave him in the cold without eating. They don't attend to his illnesses and so on. They don't let anybody visit him. They assault him physically and psychologically in every sense. So he underwent far greater hardship than most of us will ever endure. And he writes the Risale Nur in that context. The Risale Nur had to be written and disseminated piece by piece in secret. Okay, because they were never going to allow such a thing. In fact, there were many occasions on which there were police raids. Bediuzzaman and his students were imprisoned en masse on a number of occasions as a result of these writings. So that's the context in which he underwent hardship, right? Political persecution, I guess, is how we could characterize it.
So he was looked as a state terrorist.
Yeah, indeed. He was someone who was seditious, who was who stood in opposition to the government and the regime at the time. So to try to answer your question, consider this: like, he writes one particular treatise just on sickness, and 25 different ways in which the difficulty known as sickness is actually quite good.
Subhanallah.
It's actually quite good for you. Another treatise, just for the elderly and how the hardships experienced by the elderly are quite beneficial and quite good, and so on. So he ends up really seeing right through what's happening, and seeing the pen of Qadr at work. Okay, he sees that. Sure, the people persecuting him are indeed the apparent cause of what's happening to him, but he understands fully that none of this could happen to him if Allah did not permit it.
Subhanallah.
And if Allah is a being of perfection, if Allah is, Jamal and Kamal, a being of absolute beauty and absolute perfection, then everything that happens to him is not merely going to be acceptable, but actually pure beauty, pure good. And that's the understanding of hardship that he expounds.
So there's no bad for him. Everything he just sheds a positive light.
Perfectly right. He goes so far as to say this, very interesting. He says that actually there is all the things that we call musibah, calamity, none of those are calamities in the true sense. There are no true calamities other than one thing, and that's the loss of faith.
Subhanallah.
Okay. Why, in a nutshell, I mean, spend hours on the answer to that, but in a nutshell, it's going to be because whatever difficulties we undergo here, whatever thing you might call a calamity, so your mother dying, your child suffering some illness, a tsunami, a famine, a genocide indeed, okay? All the things that we refer to as calamities because they're hard for us, they're difficult for us, they're painful for us, unless you lose your faith as a result of that, those things are not calamitous in the true sense because they're always temporary. Okay? If something is to be endured for great reward, for great benefit, if there's much to gain from it, some difficulty is experienced and there's much to gain from it and it's temporary, that cannot be viewed as a calamity in the face of a loss of faith. Like a loss of faith, the consequences of that are quite permanent. Okay? If you die upon that, as we all know,
you're over.
It's Red Rover, exactly right. The consequences of that are quite lasting, quite severe compared to what is, by contrast, like a pinprick. Considered in the context of an infinite life in Jannah, some difficulties experienced here for a day or a week or a year or a whole lifetime even, turn out to be a pinprick.
And of course, like sickness in general, how they emphasize that it's purification of oneself and removing, kind of forgiving the sins that the one person has. Just like if you were to shake a tree and the fruits would fall.
Indeed.
And I remember this actually from one of our classes still, which is where even like a pinprick or something small has maybe its kind of physical or apparent reality is, yes, it hurts, but even something that small in its true reality it purifies yourself from sins.
Indeed, not only it purifies you of sin, and as I say, Bediuzzaman will tell you at least 25 ways, just as a starting point, for how it's good. And really, if we're to get right to the crux of it, all these hardships, like what is their ultimate benefit? Like there are many benefits, there are many hikmah in them, but in general, they are there because they facilitate the knowledge of Allah. They enable you to know Allah in a more full-bodied way than you would be able to, but in the absence of that difficulty. Okay, so I mean, think about it like this: let's start from the start. Allah creates us in the first place so as to make His beauty known to us. Right? That's part of the purpose of our creation. Okay. The key point in our being created is to come to know Allah's beauty. How does a finite being, right? So we're finite beings. How do we finite beings come to properly know and appreciate the beauty, the infinite beauty of a being of absolute beauty? How can that be done? It seems that, in a sense, it seems impossible. It seems that you could hardly know this being. You could know him only to some infinitesimal extent, But Allah, in His infinite wisdom, He creates this schema. He creates this whole method by which you can come to have a more full-bodied knowledge of His beauty compared to, say, other beings like malaika. Because here's the retort from the opponent. Right now, we've said so far that part of the explanation for difficulty is the fact that Allah creates us to make known His beauty, and that in some way that we haven't yet discussed, experiencing beauty is crucial to coming to know that beauty, right? What the opponent is going to say at some point in this dialectic is that, well, if your Lord wants to make known His beauty, why create a realm like this? Isn't the lion's share of divine beauty there to be known in the afterlife that you guys speak of? Yeah, that's an infinitely lasting realm where there's far more beauty manifested than here. Why not just create us there in the first place? Okay, which is tantamount to saying, why create human beings? Why not just create malaika? Because if what distinguishes the human being from the malaika is just that we've got certain faculties different to them that enable us to be examined in a realm like this. You've got the ability to, you've got free will, first of all, not just free will, but the freedom to choose, not just right, but not just various kinds of right, like the malaika, but bad as well. Okay, so that's one thing. You've got the ability to undergo difficulty of all kinds, etc., etc. So you've got nafs, nafs al-amara, and so on. Okay, you've got all of these differences to the malaika, and it's in respect of that you're human in the first place. Take away those faculties, and you're no different to an angel. Okay, so the opponent's going to say, well, why not just plonk us all in Jannah in the first place? Right? Don't create a realm like this.
Why all this? Why the world? Why struggle? Why do we pray?
Especially if it means that some child has to walk around without an arm, or 60,000 people have to be killed in a genocide, etc., etc. Surely all of this could have been avoided if God wants to make Himself known. Right. Avoid all this just by creating us in Jannah in the first place. Well, the problem with that is that large aspects of divine beauty are going to go not known properly. They're going to go unknown. Okay, if not for a realm like this, if not for a realm where you can undergo hardship, right? Where you can choose quite freely and so on. It turns out that things like free will, and not just free will, but also the freedom to choose both right and wrong, the freedom to choose something right when it's difficult to do so. Those things are quite critical for properly appreciating, properly knowing and appreciating Allah. So when I say knowing Allah, I don't just mean there knowing Him in some propositional or intellectual sense, right? Like that, Just like I would know that this is a Zawiya, this is a table. That's just like a propositional knowledge. Yeah. Malaika can be taught, right? All kinds of things about Allah in that sense. They can be taught that yes, Allah has, for example, the name of Shafi, and with that name, He can. It's through a manifestation of that name that He gives you infinite afiyah here, in this, an infinite freedom from illness here in this realm. They can be taught things like that, sure, but that's not the same kind of knowledge. That's not the same yaqeen that is had by the human being.
Yeah.
Okay.
The experiential.
It's the experiential knowledge.
That's so important. And a lot of the topics that we're discussing are so relevant to our time today, right? And which is what makes Badiʿuz Zaman Said Nursi's kind of work so relevant and important to understand. For example, to understand the name of Ash Shafi, like the one who heals, you need to know what sickness is. Like if sicknesses didn't exist in this world, and we wouldn't know the beauty of what it means to be healed.
Exactly right, but perfectly right. Yeah.
And I think it's so important that kind of, especially the classes that you've taught us, see that a lot of these key ideas that are being challenged today, which historically might not have been that brought up, things like if there's so much punishment and darkness in this world, how can Allah be
just?
So, we found a lot of kind of value in those classes. Before we get deeper into Said Nursi's kind of life and works, I was actually just wanting to get an understanding from you of if there's any kind of, when you think about your own journey of teaching and your passion of teaching Said Nursi's work, is there a specific memory or a experience or moment that really kind of reminds you of why you're so passionate in teaching Said Nursi's work? And it could just be like in a class or something like that.
It's something there was a moment that sort of sparked things off, but the larger part of that passion is something that sort of unfolded over time, I guess. What sparked it off, I came to religion later in life, like in my mid-20s. Okay.
I think most of us did.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Allah guides whom He wills at the time that He sees fit, right? So
that's right. You also appreciate guidance more after you've gone through misguidance.
Indeed,
just go back
indeed.
What says,
exactly right.
Sometimes the experiences, it really is subhanAllah.
Exactly analogous to illness.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
The person who has experienced, an absence of guidance, he appreciates guidance in a way that someone who hasn't has not felt. So for me, I was raised in a family that wasn't practicing. They weren't a practicing Muslim family, largely. But I come into religion in my mid-20s, and then I find that I want to just absorb as much knowledge as I can. I'm quite keen to absorb knowledge, but at that time, internet was quite new, right? It was quite new, so there was the whole concept of being able to go online and visit some Islamic bookstore overseas and order books. I found some beneficial books. I forget the name of the scholar, but a certain Egyptian scholar wrote a book that had been translated into English known as Understanding the Qur'an. Okay, he had a medical background. I forget his name. Might come to me, inshallah. He's not someone super well known, but he wrote this very nice book, very accessible. And I found myself reading that multiple times, at least twice over, and sort of hungering to know more. Right in the midst of that, Allah just brings it about that I bump into an old friend that I hadn't seen for years. He invites me to a sohbah or halaqah event where Risale Nur is being discussed. And the first time I heard Risale Nur, Bediuzzaman's writings being discussed, they were talking about a certain human faculty known as the ana, which I'd never heard of, had no understanding of, had no appreciation of, and it was he provided an insight into it that just made perfect sense. Right? Just made.
This is regarding the ana, right?
The ana, yeah. The me, like it's that faculty, thanks to which you have, for example, a sense of ownership. Like first of all, that there's a you who exists, and that you are someone distinct from somebody else. So that sense of, that's why it's sometimes translated as the I or the ego. That sense of I-ness, the self. Indeed, yeah. I am, a someone. Okay, first of all, and then I am the one who does certain things, or at least makes certain choices. I am the one who orders my house. I am the one who owns this phone, let's say, or at least in some sense, however limited. Okay, it's thanks to the ana that one has that. So, and it's purpose as a way of knowing Allah, was sort of pointed out and explained in a way that made so much sense that I was sort of hooked straight away. So I guess things started off there for me, and then short time after that, a certain early section of the Risale Nur. So the Risale Nur has 4 main books. The first of those is known as the Words. Says that the Words. Okay. The 11th word there is a chapter, a treatise, where he quite literally explains the whole meaning of life, right? So something that philosophers and thinkers have grappled with and continue to grapple with for centuries, right?
In one word.
So yeah, in one, maybe not just a single word, but in concept one set of ideas, in one set of ideas, or in a few sentences, he explains the entire meaning of existence, of life, why it is that we were created, and so on and so on. So these sorts of most fundamental existential questions were like answered in such a satisfying way, and made such perfect sense to me just hearing it. That I was just kind of hooked forever. And
especially the logic behind it, which we're not always used to, right?
Indeed, like the sort of reasonableness of it, like to the point where, like, I remember at that time, and actually this is how I met Brother Shabir too. So there was an online forum, goaher.com or something like that, an Islamic forum. Okay. And some non-Muslims would come onto that forum to debate or to talk. Maybe they were interested in Islam, whatever. There was a certain guy who went by the name of the Sad Clown. So Shabir and I remember this guy well. Like, we don't know what he looks like, or we've never sort of met him personally, but he was referred to as the Sad Clown. He graduated in philosophy, and you could tell that he was grappling. He was grappling, with these sorts of issues. He was an atheist, but he was certainly interested. And he would debate us quite fiercely, quite ferociously, but you could see that he wasn't debating us just for the sake of being right. Rather, he really wanted to get to the bottom of things. He really wanted to understand truth. And when I described to him what Badiʿuz Zaman Said Nursi said about why it is that we exist, like why would a God create beings like us? Okay, why would Allah create beings like us? When I explained that to him, even he said that, if there is a God, then that would be the reason why he would create. He completely agreed. Okay. Like rationally, the Risale Nur, it really, it really is, it's quite satisfying. Rationally, very, very satisfying. Which isn't to say that it doesn't also touch the heart. It certainly touches the heart too.
Very satiating.
It's very satiating. Very satiating. And so here I am, a couple of decades later, still. I just really want everybody to have access to these truths. I see it as like a great travesty that my own brothers and sisters don't know some of these things. Okay, so it's my mission, inshallah, to try to whatever extent I can myself understand these matters, is to the best of my ability to try to make those matters understandable to others. If I can do that, for the rest of my days, I'm happy.
What makes Sayyidi Bediuzzaman so unique? Like you touched upon it before, subhanAllah, the trials he went through, it's how he looked at everything in a positive light. But what else made him?
And his message as well. Like,
Yeah. Because obviously, like, people like, you read about revolutionaries, and he was definitely a revolutionary, subhanAllah. But what was the spice? What made it stand out?
Well, part of it we've discussed already, in that he had like, he spoke from pure experience, you know. So like, when he told us, hey, you know, embrace difficulty, embrace illness, embrace old age, and so on. When he told us these things, you could see the sincerity in his writings, because you knew what he went through. Okay.
Which, by the way, that is so important in this day and age, where everyone has a platform to speak and talk about things, but how many people have actually gone through that experience of truly understanding a concept?
I mean, it seems that sometimes the sincerity, well, I mean, we can't accuse necessarily, you know, everybody of a lack of sincerity, but one sometimes wonders, what is the basis? Like, where's the, you know, in what does someone's sincerity consist? You know, a certain person, right? So in Bediuzzaman's case, it was quite clear, you know, where his sincerity was grounded. He's very much a traditionalist, okay, Islamically speaking, in terms of aqidah. He's very, in terms of his theology, he's very much a traditionalist. He calls us back to tradition, back to the Sunnah. Okay,
which is contrary to what you hear about his opponents. You know, opponents, you know, you'd think this guy just some sort of, just comes with all this, you know, this woo-woo, and like, but in reality, it really was. He
is just calling us back to the Qur'an, back to the Sunnah. You know, an avoidance of, you know, unlawful innovation. He's very, very traditional in that sense. Like, he's anybody who's read or engaged with scholars or the works of scholars like Abdul Qadir Gailani, like you guys, Naqshband, Rumi, Imam Ghazali, Ahmed Sirhindi, all these guys, all the great and the good, right, of the Ummah. Okay, yes. He's greatly influenced by all these scholars, you know. So anybody who's read that stuff, if they were to pick up Risale Nur and read it, they would find it very familiar, very familiar. So yeah, he's quite traditional. To me, his part of his allure consists in that. You know, he's not somebody who's claiming, like certain groups in our community, that hey, you know, all our scholars got it wrong. Nearly all our scholars, other than maybe the first, the very earliest generations, they were all upon misguidance. They all got it wrong. Up until our guy came along recently. Okay. Right. No. Like, he does not. Doesn't
reinvent the wheel.
Doesn't reinvent the wheel. Exactly right.
It's so important to recognize the work of so many scholars and purified hearts, and how they contributed to the scholarly progression of.
What an injustice, you know, to overlook the contributions of those sorts of figures. What a great injustice. And it does not.
A millennia of scholarship, subhanAllah.
Indeed, right? How could it be that Allah would leave the Ummah upon misguidance for so many centuries? You know, and sort of only bring us back upon the truth, like, say, in recent, you know, decades or years. You know, it makes no sense. No. So therefore, Bediuzzaman's position is far, far more acceptable. You know, so that he's calling us back to the Sunnah, but without ignoring the contributions and the interpretation or the understanding of all the rightly guided scholars. Okay, he doesn't restrict the rightly guided scholars to just a very small handful of persons. So for me at least, I mean, it's hard to speak for anybody else, but for me at least, these are the things that I find appealing in Bediuzzaman, you know. Also he says this, you know, I find this, you know, quite remarkable. He says that, like, pick any of those scholars, pick, like, for example, Rumi, right? Like, most of us be familiar with the writings of Rumi and his poetry, and you know, his poetry is extremely popular. Like, he's the most popular poet in the Western world, for example.
Even if it's mistranslated.
Even if it's not translated right, you know.
And miscontextualized as well.
Indeed. So, you know, but what he says about scholars like that is that if they lived today, right, if they lived in these circumstances and amidst this forced secularization or this time of atheism and materialism and, the neo-Darwinian evolutionary paradigm and if he lived in the midst of all of this, if they lived in the midst of all of this, they would have written, rather than writing what they did write, they would have written something exactly like this. Okay, what they wrote would have resembled it very much as copy and paste, because this is what's needed. Okay,
that's the focus on more kind of logic and reasonableness. Is that?
Well, here's the thing. Like what the Risale Nur does, it's at bottom, it's a book about. It's a tafsir, as I said, in a non-classical sense, but really it's a book about ma'rifatullah. It's a book about knowing Allah, right? Through His names and attributes as they're manifested in creation. Now, in order to know Allah in that sense, first and foremost, one has to have iman, one has to have faith. So if that's lacking, that's the first thing that's got to be addressed. And even in Turkey today, like foremost Sufis from, scholars from, various Sufi tariqah, they agree. They agree that, that's exactly right. If there's a lack of iman, that's the first thing to be addressed. Okay. So he focuses a great deal on that. He focuses a great deal on, for example, rational arguments for the existence of Allah and the unity of Allah, but ones that are very much grounded in the Qur'an. Okay, so his key argument for Allah's existence is very much grounded in the Qur'an. That's why when I speak of it as the Quranic argument for Allah's existence. Like alhamdulillah, I have the privilege of, as of this year, teaching, as you're aware, brother, teaching advanced Aqidah at the Melbourne Muslim Seminary. I construct the whole course on Bediuzzaman's Quranic argument for Allah's existence, and then I only mention in passing other arguments that are sort of popular among some of the young guys, like the kalam, cosmological argument, the contingency argument. I mention those in passing only because those sorts of arguments have got to be seen as somewhat inferior compared to an argument that's grounded in the Qur'an. Right? Bediuzzaman's argument for Allah's existence is like literally extracted from the Qur'an.
So, on that note, sorry, I was going to stop you on that. I was going to say, subhanAllah, because as you just explained, subhanAllah, Bediuzzaman's works, mashallah, yes, he was traditional, but he was also very rational as well. And you can't deny logic behind it. It's very convincing, subhanAllah. But how did he unite? So there's two factors. We know in Islam there's the qalb, the heart, there's the aql. And he did a profound job in uniting those, subhanAllah. Can you maybe talk a bit about that? How did he merge the both, the rational and spiritual?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess at bottom, the answer to a question like that is just going to be just by pointing to like his focus on. So his focus is on coming to know Allah. Okay. What he calls us to is coming to know Allah using not just any particular faculty, right? So he speaks at length of various human faculties. I mentioned already the ana. He sees that all of those human faculties. So I mean, when we say the qalb, I guess we need to sort of define that. But I think what people think of when you say that the heart are really the feelings, which is really just an aspect of qalb. It's just only one aspect of qalb. Really, the qalb is that thing via which we know, right? Like, to try to explain what the qalb is, you'd have to say something along these lines. Get everything you know in the fullest sense of the word, right? Including everything that you've felt, everything that you've experienced, everything that you've known in that experiential sense. Okay, draw a circle around that, and that's your qalb, right? It's your it's the full set of things that you believe, the full set of things that you know, the full set of things that you like and love, and so on. So when we speak, for example, of the qalb should be reserved for Allah and so on, or when we talk, let's say, of a corrupted heart, well, what the corrupted heart is going to consist in is someone who believes the wrong things, right? Likes the wrong things, sees as good things that are actually ugly, right? So the qalb is this kind of faculty via which we know Allah, right? And it receives stimuli from mainly from the aql on the one hand, and then the wijdan on the other. Okay, so you've got the aql, that sort of faculty of ratiocination, intellection, right, via which we know propositional truths and rational truths and things like that. Then on the other hand, you've got the wijdan, right, via which
would be, so just for viewers, and wijdan would be?
Well, I mean, it's probably translated as the conscience, but it doesn't really give a sense of it.
Yeah.
It's that faculty, from my understanding at least, it's that faculty via which we know certain truths via feeling them. Like, for example,
like your intuition, sort of, like the gut feeling.
That's part of it. That's certainly going to be one of the ways in which we know things.
Right.
Okay. When we talk about the wijdan, like, think about this, right? Picture a scenario like this. There's a man in the city, looks like a homeless man, and he's there begging for money, let's pretend. Okay, I always tend to use examples like this, so I apologise for those that have heard me speak before. But, there's the man, okay, he's begging for money, and someone comes along and you can see that they sort of, I don't know, maybe they're shedding a tear, they've got a certain look on their face, and you see that they take pity upon this man and they give him, they generously give him some money, and you witness this, let's pretend. Right? You're there, you're watching this from afar, and you feel a certain feeling, right? That's the wisdom they're operating, right? Making known to you a certain truth, right? A certain, really at bottom, an aspect of divine beauty, right? Therein, there we see one drop from the ocean of Allah's mercy, like one manifestation of the beauty of Allah's name, let's say Kareem or Rahim or Mubni and so on. So by feeling a certain feeling, okay, in the heart, let's say, right? But by feeling a certain feeling, you are knowing something, right? You're knowing it at a certain level of yaqeen, at least. You're knowing it maybe at most at the level of ayn al-yaqeen, right? Because you're watching this from afar. Let's pretend now that you're that person. You're that person giving that person that money. And you're freely choosing this. So you're freely choosing to give this person, say, a $50 note, knowing that that represents 50% of your disposable income. Let's pretend, right? Hypothetically. So,
It's not far off food today, by the way.
That's not, right? So, you badly need that money yourself, let's pretend, but you feel sorry for this person and you say to yourself, well, he seems to need it more than me. And in any case, anything that's given for Allah's sake is never wasted. It's never lost. Allah is going to return this to me tenfold. So you think of things like this. So you feel sorry for this guy and you give that guy that $50 note. Now that's clearly a greater level of yaqeen, a greater level of certainty, a more full-bodied experiential knowledge of the beauty, let's say, or at least an aspect, at least a drop from the ocean of the beauty of Allah's name, let's say, of Mubni or Rahim or Rahman and many other names like that. So the wijdan is that faculty that operates in situations like that. And it's yet another way of knowing Allah. Because if you understand what's really going on there, and you don't attribute that to yourself, okay? Right? So the ana, if misused, makes you think that it's really you who's, if not understood properly at least, it makes you feel as though you're the one who's giving that person that money. You're the one that's taking away this person's difficulties and pain and so on. But when you scratch beneath the surface, you see that actually, okay, it can't be me. It can't really be me. Really, I don't even properly understand what it is for some being to be conscious, right? Let alone have the power to create changes in that person's conscious experience. Let's face it. I don't really know how it is that my arm, right, and all its particles move from here to there to stop this from falling, let's pretend, right? How do they all move, right, without spoiling their order, right? Knowing that these particles are actually, relatively speaking, are separated by great distances from one another, okay? Because we know, right, that an atom's electron is quite a relatively speaking, very far away from its nucleus.
Yes.
So you've got these subatomic particles. They're separated by great distances. So it's not like they're stuck together.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all move from here to there. Is it really me who creates all those effects? Is it really me who moves all of those particles? I can't even lay claim to that. I can't even lay claim to the simplest motion of my finger, let alone lay claim to someone's hunger being removed, let's say, or whatever, or anything else you can think of. So once what Bediuzzaman says in relation to those sorts of matters is understood, right? And we see, we understand Tawhid from that perspective, right? We understand that, okay, this could only be done by Allah. Right? Could only be Allah who's moving all these particles all at once. Okay, I mean, either you've got to give God like capacities to every particle, or alternatively, say that there's just one God who's moving them all at once. You know, otherwise you've got to give God like power and knowledge to every particle. You know,
it's like, in essence, if you think about it, that's the essence of la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no change.
And la ilaha illallah and such things. Yes. Exactly right, brother. It's very much the essence. That's why we pronounce those formulas. When we pronounce those formulas, to answer your question, right, you rationally understand what it means. Let's say you've been taught what it means for Allah to be one. You know, you've been taught maybe the meanings of His names of Fard, Ahad, and Wahid, so that therefore you know something of His oneness. Let's pretend. But that's quite different, isn't it? Right? Knowing those things, is quite different to experientially coming into confrontation or contact with them in the way that I've just described. Yeah. So you engage in a certain action out in the world. And then, when you reflect upon it, you realise that, wow, man, that whole time, that was Allah taking away that homeless person's difficulties. Yeah. Okay? And what He did is that He just gave me not even a ringside, like an in-ring seat. Like, more than a ringside view of it all. Right? Yeah. So, let's briefly just speak of the 3 levels of yaqeen. I think all of this makes sense when that's sort of understood, right? So, let me ask you this, right? Who knows something better, right? Who knows, let's say, and now, I like to watch the Muslim UFC fighters, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so who knows the Ultimate Fighting Championship or mixed martial arts better, right? Who knows it better out of these 3 persons? Okay. First, you've got this guy who reads everything about that sport in a book. Yeah, he reads all about it, and he has like a propositional knowledge of every single aspect of that sport. He knows the name of every move, and he knows everything that could be known about that sport. He knows,
and he's got a podcast show as well.
He's got a podcast about it. You know, he can talk about it at length. He can do all that. He knows it perfectly well, let's say, right? Therefore, we'd say that he knows it at the level of ilm al-yaqeen, right? He has what's translated as like a certainty at the level of like full knowledge. Yeah. Okay. So that's one way of knowing, sure. Then you've got another person who's actually there at the arena, and he knows everything that guy knows too. Let's pretend, but he additionally is there to see it, to hear it, to smell it. Like, he knows what it sounds like when one guy hits another. Okay? Like, something that you can't appreciate when you watch it on TV, let's pretend, or when you read about it in a book. He knows what it sounds like when one guy throws another onto the mat, or one guy screams in pain, or he knows what it sounds like when one guy screams in ecstasy at winning. He knows all that, let's pretend. So, we might say that guy knows with the certainty of witnessing, right? At the level of ayn al-yaqeen, right? But none of that can be compared to being the guy in the octagon or in the ring who's actually experiencing all of that, who's actually fighting, right? He knows that sport and everything about it in ways that the other 2 guys can never appreciate, okay? Bediuzzaman's calling us to know Allah in that latter way, right? We are trying to come to know Allah as much as is possible for a finite being, at least, right? Using all of our faculties, right? Not just the aql, not just the qalb, but all of the faculties, right? Everything that you've got, right? And the only way to do that is to live in the world and have certain experiences, which is why Allah says in the Qur'an that we should travel through the world and experience things.
Right.
So he says that, there are three key ways that Allah makes himself known to us. On the one hand, you've got the book that we know as the Qur'an, okay, that teaches about Allah and what he's like, especially the Ayat al-Kursi and so on, right? Tells us all about Allah and his attributes and what he is and what he isn't, okay. Then you also have the great book that we call this universe, right? It's a book in its own right. Everything that happens in this universe happens to make known, in one way or another, Allah's names and attributes. Okay, the manifestations of Allah's names and attributes are there to be seen everywhere if you know how to look. Okay, and then finally you have our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he lived and how he was, right? His Sunnah basically. Okay. So it's through those. It's only by interacting with all three of those things, using all of your faculties, that you can really fulfill the purpose for which Allah has created you. He's created you to come to know Him. The faculties that have been given to you, like how we speak of the amana, right?
Yeah.
Part of the amana, the lion's share of the amana, is using those faculties for the purpose for which they were designed.
That's such a good point. And,
okay.
And when you think about the importance of experience, which we've discussed so far, and you mentioned that in Bediuzzaman's life and works and message, that is one of the things that stands out so much, which is the hardships that he's gone through. And so I wanted to understand, we were talking about this before, but if we could continue talking about some of the hardships that Said Nursi went through and how these experiences actually shaped the depth of his spirituality and also his writings.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing that stands out is that, he was really, isolated, from everybody that he loved. Okay, and that on the one hand, it's great pain, but on the other hand, it afforded him the opportunity to focus on his relationship with his Lord. Okay, to focus on his writings and things of that nature. It got to the point where even later, when his conditions eased somewhat, he found it difficult to accept visitors. I guess he had potentially become accustomed, to that sort of isolation and loneliness. He had his, close brothers around him that would assist him, but people would want to visit him from far and wide. Okay, so whenever anybody was nearby, of course they'd want to come and visit Badiʿuz Zaman Said Nursi. And he wasn't always, keen to meet with people. It's just one of the things that, really, struck me. He's just been. He writes of his anguish. He writes of the anguish that he experienced when he's isolated, and reading of that, it really just breaks the heart. It really breaks the heart. I guess that's just one thing, brother. That's one thing. I'm not the world's expert, on, every aspect on Bediuzzaman's personality. Actually, interesting point. Bediuzzaman would actually encourage us to focus less on him. This is one thing that he says explicitly. He says, when you read the Risale-i-Nur, right, he says, you ought to see Allah and see the Qur'an, right? That's what ought to come to mind. Don't see me, don't focus on me. Don't see me as anybody special. This is really the product of ilham. It's really, it ought to be attributed to Allah. If whatever truth in there is in there, it's a manifestation of Allah's names and attributes. Allah's name of Al-Haq, for example. Allah's Rahmah for us. So he really wanted to shift the focus because he knows how we are, and he knows that we tend to, idolize figures, right? He knows that we tend to focus on personalities and individuals, okay? And he didn't want that to be done in relation to him, right? He wanted us to instead, focus on the Risale-i-Nur as a tafsir of the Qur'an, as a means to knowing Allah, rather than focus on him. I guess it's, something to take heed of. So less of a focus on him and more of a focus on his message, I guess. Is what I sort of take, from what he teaches. Yeah.
SubhanAllah, on that note, actually, of loneliness and stuff, and being isolated, SubhanAllah, we live in an age today where, especially since after the pandemic, isolation, people being lonely has become quite pandemic as well, SubhanAllah. Do you think, what kind of lessons do you think people today, especially the youth today, can relate maybe and learn from the struggles where Bediuzzaman went through when he was isolated alone?
Yeah, sure. Coming back to what we said earlier, we've gotta remember this, first things first. Okay, I might not know the hikmah in something. Let's pretend, right? Yeah. Because that's the thing. We're not always going to have access. Even myself, I still grapple intellectually with all these ideas that we discussed today. I still see myself as hardly a student, right? A reader at best. I'm still trying to understand all these matters. So we might not always understand the hikmah or the wisdom or the reason why it is that Allah has put me in a certain sort of pain, isolation, you name it, right? At a certain point in time, But what I can know is this at the very least, okay? I can know certain things at the very least. If I believe in a being named Allah, okay, what that name Allah denotes is all of his other names and attributes. Allah. Yeah, okay. So, there's the notion in our theology of certain names, in a sense being like umbrella names for others. Here's one example, the name Fard, is the example, my go-to example. The name Fard, what does the name Fard mean? Most people haven't heard of it, right? It points to Allah's oneness. It's about Allah's oneness. But to say that Allah is Fard, it's translated as single, in one translation at least. To say that Allah is Fard is to say that he is both Ahad and Waheed, okay? Right. So, he's one, both in terms... and this is only just to scratch the surface of what these names mean, of course, right? He's one both in terms of his Zat and in terms of his names and attributes. So nobody has the Zat that he has. It's how we all have a ruh, right? So I've got a ruh, and it's my ruh, but you too have a ruh, and you have a ruh, of course. We all have a ruh. Yep. Allah's essence, Allah's Zat is had by him and him alone, okay? So he's completely unique, right? In that sense, he's Ahad. Okay, he's one in that sense. Okay, so his name Ahad points to the oneness of his Zat. Waheed points to the oneness of his names and attributes. Nobody has the names and attributes that he does. If that's the case, then that means that any manifestation of those names and attributes is going to be attributed to him and him alone. Okay, so the name of Fard points to that. All right, if that's all the case, if I believe in a being who has the name Allah, then if I don't believe in a being who's also Ahad and Wahid and Fard, right, then that's no longer the same being, right? If I don't believe, and in particular, if I don't believe in a being who is things like Wadud and Rahman and Rahim, and in particular Adl, okay, perfectly just, who never does us wrong, okay? If I don't believe in a being with those names and attributes and with that nature, then that's no longer Allah. I'm not believing in the same being. Right? So to say that Allah, for example, is Adl, is to say that He's Adala, right? He is justness, He is absolute, it's perfect. It has no imperfection, no deficiency, no lack. So to believe in Allah is to believe in a being who is like that. If that's true, then what follows from that logically and inescapably is that even if I don't know the hikmah in why it is that I'm isolated, why it is that I've got a cancer or an illness, or why I've lost my loved one, or why it is that there's a genocide in Gaza or anything, even if I can't, in a very fine grained way, know the hikmah in that, I know that it's got to have a hikmah. It's got to be perfectly wise and perfectly just and perfectly beautiful. It's got to be completely beautiful and in no sense ugly. No ugliness can be imputed to Allah because of it at all. Not an ounce of imperfection can be attributed to Allah in respect of that at all. Because if it could be, then Allah would no longer be an absolute being. He would no longer be Allah at all. You'd be believing in a different being after that.
Yes.
So as long as our aqidah is, in place, as long as we know who we believe in and we know what the name Allah means, at least in a rudimentary way, then really our theodicy can end there. Our refutation of the person who claims that there can't be a just God, it ends there. That's all we really need to say. But here's the thing: the heart, it does want to know at least a little bit about what could be the hikmah. And then that's when we get into all the different benefits and what good can come of Allah making us go a certain sort of hardship at a certain time. And so on. And the general answer to that is going to be this: how is it? Remember, I said it at the start. How does a finite being come to know the infinite beauty, the absolute beauty of an absolute being? It's only by breaking that up in a metaphorical sense, breaking his beauty up, and knowing it aspect by aspect or degree by degree. And what creates degree, metaphorically speaking, what creates degrees in, let's say, the beauty of, Allah's name of Shafi, let's say, right? What creates degrees in that is just the apparent opposite. The apparent opposite. What Allah does is that, so normally, let's say you're in a state of well-being, you're in a state of afiyah, alhamdulillah, right? Sometimes He just takes that away for a time, so that, right, by having an experience, right, that experiential knowledge of a lack of well-being, now we can both know and appreciate the value of well-being.
That's right.
And in that sense, we can know Allah's name is Shafi, and if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have anywhere near as full-bodied knowledge of it. Our knowledge of it would be, and therefore our rank would be no higher than the angels.
Yes.
Okay? So, what does it mean to have a high rank anyway? What does it mean to grow spiritually? It can mean nothing other than having a better knowledge of Allah. It can't mean it at bottom anyway. I mean, it can, at higher levels of analysis, we can describe it in all kinds of ways. But at bottom, you can be better than someone else, right? Only in respect of your closest to Allah, and that closest consisting your knowledge of Him in the broad sense of the word.
Experienced by all faculties.
With all faculties. With all faculties.
I remember once you mentioned in class as well, we wouldn't actually know the what light means.
Indeed.
If we didn't know what darkness was.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So that's the key example that Bediuzzaman gives, right? Allah is an infinite being, right? His name of Nur is infinite. If He wants, one manifestation of the name of Nur is the creation of light, let's say. Okay. Can Allah not create an infinite light? Of course He can, like an ongoing light everywhere that never ends. He could do that. But then, the beauty of that particular manifestation of Allah's name of Nur would be of only one kind. It will be unvariegated. And to that extent, it would be unknown and unappreciated. Like, you could know it only to some small extent. You could be taught, hey, there's light, sure. But in the absence of its lack of its apparent opposite, being darkness, which doesn't even exist, right? It's just really the absence of light, isn't it?
Yep.
Right. Without its apparent opposite, you don't know it. So what Allah does is He creates, periods of darkness so that light can be known, for example, and therefore one aspect of the beauty of His name of Nur, right? Because imagine this, here we are, we're in Jannah, let's say, we're in Jannah, we're there for all eternity, and we never ever experience hardship, never ever experience difficulty. I say that our knowledge of the beauty of, let's say, of Allah's name of Shafi, is far inferior to the person who has been to the dunya and has experienced hardship. Okay, because then you can know, and of course in Jannah we're going to have access to our former lives in all dimensions, in a very full-bodied way if you want. Anytime you want, you can go and see anything that happened in history, right, in Jannah. That's one of the benefits or bounties of Jannah, to be able to come back and view, right, and hear and feel and do everything, right, that happened here in this context, for example. So you're going to have full epistemic access to what you went through without obviously any of its negative connotations,
of course.
right? You're not going to be in agony, you're not going to be in pain, but yeah, you're going to have enough access to it to be able to understand and appreciate the beauty of what you're experiencing in Jannah, and in its absence you wouldn't be able to do so.
Right.
Okay. It would simply be lost upon you. Now, if you doubt this, I just ask you to wonder when was the last time you appreciated certain ongoing ni'mah that Allah gives you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, for example, when did you last thank Allah for the fact that your eyelids still work?
SubhanAllah.
Or the fact that your hand is still attached to your arm,
Yep.
or any such goods.
Right.
I mean, go after people of Gaza. Is it good to have both your arms or not? It's real good, they know in a way that we don't know how good it is to have both your arms.
Experience that manifestation.
Okay. All those amputees there, they know it in a way that we don't.
Yeah.
We completely overlook it most of the time until someone mentions it, let's say. You just take it for granted that arm's always there, or that hand's always there, or that eyelid always works.
Yep.
Right? Any ongoing ni'mah is underappreciated to the extent that it's ongoing, right? So that proves there that in the absence of the apparent opposites of the ni'mah that Allah gives us, we're not going to properly know His beauty. Okay. So therefore, what that means is that Allah's enabling us to undergo difficulty and thereby, coming to know, for example, His name is Shafi and so on. It's actually a great good, right? And Bediuzzaman goes so far as to say is that its actual lack would be ugly, right? It's not that illness is ugly; it's rather the absence of illness that would be ugly, because then many far greater beauty would go unknown, would go unexperienced by us.
Appreciating the beauty of the Shafi.
Yeah, and the same story could be run in relation to all of his names and attributes, pretty much. Yeah.
So, one of the things I think some people struggle with is, theoretically, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the middle of difficulty, there's an aspect of almost like mujahida or struggle that you have to do between your nafs with shaitan,
good point.
Where you actually have to get to that point of truly believing in that. Almost like, for example, exercising sabr in the middle of something challenging. How do you think, is there, for example, examples or writings of Said Nursi's life or writings that he helps us understand how we can practically do that?
Well, that, like, how in the Qur'an it says that the believers are those who, when calamity befalls them, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Okay? What that's pointing to in part, is this, right? That, what you described is in its own right a ni'mah. It's in its own right a key means by which we come into contact experientially with Allah's beauty. Okay,
to go through a struggle.
To go through a struggle, to be in that position where you've got to show patience, right? Where you've got to kind of, you've got to kind of battle and say, hey, look,
I've got no choice.
This is, it's hard to say to Allah, we belong to Him is our return. When my loved one has died or when I'm in the midst of a genocide, it's hard, but I've got to do so. And it's a struggle to do so, but I do so despite it being a struggle. That therein, right at that point, right, is where the believer gets to shine. And in its absence, right, that ability to shine would not be there. And then one of the key means by which as Bediuzzaman puts it, right, to ask for, he asked for something from his writings, right? He says that in the absence of this sort of difficulty, there would be no means by which to separate the Abu Jahls from the Abu Bakrs. Okay. There's going to be no way to rank human beings. There's going to be no way for anybody to shine compared to somebody else. And remember, what does that shining consist in? It's nothing dispensable. It consists in nothing other than a greater knowledge of Allah. Okay? To have a greater rank is to have a greater knowledge of Allah, which means to have a greater access to His infinite beauty than someone else, which in its own right is an infinite good. Okay? I mean, just think about it like in terms of this concrete example. Let's think, right? You've got someone, right? Yeah, let's think of our guy in the city again. Okay? He's there, he's begging for money. Right? Now, here I am, I'm a free-willed being. Right? I'm a free-willed being, and I don't have to use my free will to give him some money, let's say. I don't have to. I could have chosen 100 other things. I could have spent that money on 100 other things. Okay? So, one, right, I freely choose to give it to him, let's pretend. And if I didn't have the freedom there, that whole action in which I engage in an act of charity for Allah's sake, and therefore come to know, like, Allah's name of Kareem, let's say, because I know it's really him, but if it weren't for my having free will there, straight away, a lot of the meaning would be lost. Okay? Imagine, I'm just an automaton. I'm just like a robot, you know? Yeah, listen, I've got a remote control, you know, and I use that remote control robot to, like, bring us a glass of water. Are we going to applaud the robot? What for? I'm the one who controlled it. Well, you're the one who controlled it, okay? Sure. The applause belongs to, you know, whoever controlled it. Okay? Right. So having free will is key. But not just free will. That free will would be meaningless in its own right. Be more or less meaningless if it were extremely easy to do whatever good we're talking about. Let's pretend that I'm a trillionaire. Right? What meaning is there in me giving that guy $50? Okay, I'm a trillionaire. In fact, I've probably done something bad by giving him $50. I should have probably
disgraced him.
Yeah, I've done something shameful. I should have maybe given him a home, or done something far more generous given my means. So difficulty is quite essential for giving meaning, right, to all of this, right? So we're trying to come to know Allah using all of our faculties. If that were extremely easy to do, if there were no difficulty involved, it would not have at all the same meaning. It would not have at all the same value. We understand the value in the beauty of Allah's name of Kareem, let's say, only to the extent of how difficult it is for us to engage in that at that time.
So it's true that we have been put in hard mode. We came to this world, we live in this world, we live in this life in hard mode.
That's the main thing that separates this world from the akhirah, right? This is just the realm of hardship. And given that hardship is beneficial in those sorts of ways, it's critical to coming to know Allah in ways that would be otherwise impossible. Really, we ought to be surprised that there isn't much more of it. It's only thanks to Allah's knowing what we're capable of, right, that we don't have more difficulty. So that if the people of Gaza, let's say, are undergoing extreme difficulty, know that that's Allah actually honouring them, right? That's Allah giving them the opportunity to shine to their maximum potential, because He knows their potential, right? He knows that I haven't got that potential, let's say, and He doesn't therefore put me in that degree of difficulty. But He knows that that guy over there has, and He gives him the opportunity to shine, knowing that. So therefore, he's able to attain a rank and therefore able to know Allah to an extent that someone with a lesser capacity, like this Nafis Paras being here, has not got. Okay, so we see that hardship is quite essential. It's quite indispensable. It's what, together with freedom, it's what gives meaning to this whole notion of coming to know Allah. You would not be able to know Him if it weren't for that. You certainly would not appreciate its beauty. Yeah, like imagine there's a guy who gives in charity, right? Knowing there's a guy who gives in charity or does whatever other good you can think of, but let's just pick on charity. There's a guy who gives his money in charity, knowing that if he gives that money, look, he's going to be almost broke himself, let's say. Why? Well, what does he manifest when he does that? What does he show that he understands? He shows that he understands how important charity is, let's say. What a beautiful thing is charity. Right? Giving charity, taking away someone's pain, is far more valuable than what that $50 can buy him. In that moment, he shows that he understands that, and moreover, he has an experiential knowledge of it. He knows it by doing, by feeling, by actually going through it. He's like the guy in the octagon. Okay. So take away hardship. Yeah, you remove all hardships if you like. All that knowledge is lost. Right? All that access to divine beauty is forever gone. So therefore, what Allah does is just creates this very short, time here. Right? As you guys will know, when we die on the day of judgment, what are people going to say to one another? How long did you spend here? I spent, a day or part of a day.
An hour,
just some very short time. Because in reality, that's how short it is. It seems like it's super long,
50,000 years.
When viewed incorrectly, it can seem like forever. But in reality, it's just Allah just gets this short time in which He opens up windows onto His infinite beauty that would otherwise be inaccessible. So and in general, we're going to be very thankful for it. We're going to be in a far better position thanks to it. Those are some of the key things I gained from Bediuzzaman and his writings. I
was going to ask you on that note as well. Subhanallah. With Mujahada as well, there's something else that, like another aspect, and another key part of faith when going through Mujahada is, as Bediuzzaman I think would have mentioned a few times in his works, is having hope, raja. How important is it to have that hope, especially when you're going through struggles and living this world on hard mode?
It's everything, bro. It's everything, because, look, what is a lack of hope tantamount to? A lack of hope is tantamount to a misunderstanding of who Allah is. Okay. So the person who's given up all hope, it's on the way to kufr. It's on the way to kufr. It's to forget that Allah is Adl, for example, or Rahman, or Rahim. It's to forget that everything that He does is perfectly good. Everything that He does. He's an infinite being. He has no need of doing the suboptimal. Right? He has no need of doing the second best thing or the third best thing. Everything that He does is going to. That's why our scholars say that. I'm not an Arabic speaker. I know certain key terms, but so I forget the Arabic for it. But our scholars say that this is the best of all possible worlds. This is the best of all possible worlds. There is nothing in the sphere of contingency or the sphere of imkan. There is no other way that this world can be other than the way that it is. This is the perfect world. Right? Out of all possible worlds, it's the perfect world.
And that generates every single second as time goes on.
Indeed. Moment by moment, everything that happens, is just part of that perfect story. So this just follows. Again, you don't need to know too much to understand this. All you got to know is what Allah's name denotes. Once you know that, this just follows logically from that. Either you believe in that being or not. Now, so that's why it's for that reason that Bediuzzaman spends a significant amount of time on, why is it, what reason have we got to believe that Allah exists in the first place? And maybe another time we could talk about that, because that's really fundamental. Without knowing that and various other truths of belief, all this other stuff is secondary. That's why Bediuzzaman actually mentions this, he says that, and he attributes this saying either to Abdul Qadir Gilani or Imam Rabbani, one of the two, that they say, one of those figures, I forget which, says that I would prefer the unfolding of a single truth of belief, a single truth relating to Allah, such as His existence or His unity or whatever. I would prefer, the proper understanding or what they refer to as the unfolding of one of those compared to 1,000 instances of karama or similar things. Like
miracles and flying and
instances of Volk and things like that. So one of those is better than 1,000 of those. Without that, you've got nothing. So if you believe in Allah with all of His names and attributes, then you've got a ready response, like a ready means for hope in any situation. Okay. I might not know what is the particular, in a fine-grained way, what is the particular hikmah in this particular instance of suffering? Why did Allah make my son misbehave in this particular way at this particular time and cause me this particular stress? I might not know in a very fine-grained way. Allah knows, though. He knows, for example, what free choices it's going to generate on my part. And He sees that that's best for me, let's say, right? I might not know all of that, like I might not have read much Risala or anything like that. I don't know all these things. But if I know that Allah exists, then that's all I need to know that it must be good.
Submission.
Taslim and tawakkul. Okay? To submit and to rely on Allah. Right? These are key things that Bediuzzaman focuses on. All you need for that is just Iman. Right? Iman and some knowledge of Allah and His names and attributes. Okay.
And if there was one lesson that you think would be the most valuable lesson for a young Muslim to know from Bediuzzaman's works or writings, what would that be?
One lesson, I mean, that don't ever forget that the point in your creation is to come to know Allah. Okay, that is the most fundamental, the most primary thing for you to remember. And I feel like this is just lost upon people. You know, we just think that we're here to, to get a certain job, to get married, to have kids, to accumulate a certain degree of wealth, to do whatever set of things. Whatever is the set of things that preoccupies people. You know, we think we're here for that. Muslims and non-Muslims alike, we all make this mistake. But really, the point in your creation is to come to know Allah. Keep that in mind at all times. Okay, you're here to know Allah. Base everything on that.
There's always something to learn, right? It's never every single day. There's always something you appreciate, understand. Just the infiniteness of Allah.
Exactly right. You know, and what goes hand in hand with this idea that we've just both mentioned is ikhlas too. That's the other thing. He focuses very significantly on ikhlas, right? Sincerity, and its relationship to ukhuwah too. Right? He sees that every breach of ukhuwah amounts to a failure of ikhlas. Okay, he shows how that's the case. You know, without ikhlas, nothing that we do has any value. Okay, so we mustn't forget that. We must keep that at the forefront of the mind as we act moment to moment. You know, so okay, on the one hand, I know that my mission here is to come to know Allah. And how do I come to know Him? Well, it's by engaging in the world, right, with all my latifas. Right? I've got to use all my faculties to engage in the world. Like, I shouldn't just go in a cave and just do zikr necessarily. Look, that might be maybe for someone that's the best thing, but for the majority of us, what in Allah's perfect knowledge and hikmah, He has seen that what's best for us is really that we live as we live, right? What do? We live in communities, we get married, we have children, we have a job, we do all those sorts of things. Allah has seen that it's in that context that we come to know Him the best. Otherwise, He would have created the world upon a different schema. He would have created one planet for each human or whatever He wants. Okay, He could have done whatever He wants, right? If He wanted us to be alone, let's say.
That's so true. Like, for example, like it's very easy for someone to say they're patient. If they have nobody around them.
Indeed.
If I had this, if I had that.
Exactly right. If I was rich.
People often say, like, when you get married, that's when you really figure out how much patience.
Exactly right. Exactly right, mate. It's a lot of compromise. Let me put it that way, mate. It's a lot of compromise, you know, especially when you have kids. A lot of compromise with your kids too, you know. Not with your wife.
The importance of engaging in the world and constantly develop, improve, and cultivate.
That's where the opportunities for this, you know, marifat, like this, you know, coming to know Allah through His names and attributes. That's where you get the chance to experientially have that knowledge, right? Yeah, it's in the, you know, people think, look, here's a mistake, right? Here's a mistake. People think this. How am I going to come to know Allah's name of Kareem, let's say? What I've got to do, once in a lifetime, I've got to go to a certain part of the world. I won't pick on any particular part. I've got to go to some third world nation, and I've got to work with a charity there for 6 weeks during my long service leave or whatever, and then come back. And that is the, you know, paradigm, we think, of generosity or sacrifice and so on. Completely wrong. How many of us will do that in a lifetime? You know, very few of us. Very few of us will have that opportunity, okay, to do that. Very few of us will have that luxury to be able to do that. Most of our opportunities for generosity, self-sacrifice are going to be in the context of a relationship with a wife, children, and mother, father, brother. You know, that's where most of those opportunities are. And generally they're thankless. Like, you know, nobody who applauds you for, hey, you know, you married somebody, or I'm sure we have weddings and stuff, but, you know, subsequent to the wedding, I'm saying, like, who really applauds you day to day for the fact that you're married, or for the fact that you've got a child, you know, or for whatever else? Who applauds you? Nobody applauds you. It's quite thankless. You know, we think that, you know, these things, we've just got to do them. You know, we're obliged to do them. In a sense, we are obliged to do them. I mean, if you find yourself in a position of being a father or a husband, sure, you have a whole range of obligations that Allah has, you know, placed upon you. But that doesn't mean that those things are rewardable by Allah. Okay, Allah rewards those things. It's in that context that you have that experiential knowledge that I'm talking about. Day to day, I'm saying, day to day, a father, leaves the last piece of bread for his child, or whatever, does whatever, list a trillion things. Day to day, a mother, a father, a brother does things that facilitate for him that experiential knowledge of various aspects of divine beauty.
Yeah, I love that. Subhanallah. It's not people just think, I'm just a mother at home and I help my kids with my kids. This is my ibadah. Like,
it's nothing special.
Yeah.
And that person's rank could be far higher than the person going and doing that charity work, because the person doing the charity work can't help but feel like he's doing something special. He's applauded by everybody. His ikhlas is at great risk, and so on and so on. Whereas the poor old thankless mother, nobody applauds her, nobody appreciates her. The ikhlas is that
no one's watching.
Nobody's watching. Most of the time, it's not seen. It's unknown. It's unappreciated. So Allah creates there for you the opportunity to know Him, to act as a shining mirror to the beauty and perfection of His names and attributes with ikhlas. So.
Jazakallah khair, Ustadh Turhan, mashallah, you took us through the ocean of Tawhid, mashallah. You immersed us a little bit, a few drops, mashallah, speaking to us about the life of Bediuzzaman, mashallah, and the lessons you brought us from, inshallah, and how we can benefit, mashallah. Jazakallah khair.
But before we do close, kind of a question was, if you could sit for tea with Bediuzzaman, what's the one question that you'd ask him?
Do you forgive me for my failures in respect of my service to this Hizmet?
There's nothing to forgive, inshallah. There's nothing to forgive.
Thank you so much for coming here and be so much beneficial knowledge and spreading the knowledge of Sayyid Nursi.
May Allah be pleased with you, brothers, man, for everything that you guys do and for your dedication. It's you deserve great applause.
All from Allah.